So during COVID, the world was going to end, and then the Russia-Ukraine war, the world's going to end. Anybody notice change in pattern, right? Lots of earthquakes, fires, flooding all over the place. Basically every week you hear about something, right? I do, at least, if you have a cell phone, if you have an app. And so as all of these things happen, and especially as our world becomes more and more connected, and as we hear more and more of these things, it's like literally this place is flooding and people are dying, and this place is burning and people are dying, and this place has a drought and places in war and people are dying. You kind of go, hey, I remember hearing about all this stuff. It's called the Revelation of St. John. And so just as we get more and more connected, as news is easier to share, I get a lot more memes, more and more memes, and more articles sent to me about how this is the end of the world and this is the book of Revelation coming true. And so in the midst of all this, and again, I think especially during COVID and certain things, it's kind of this industry, as I call it, has grown quite a bit. And the problem now is with AI, it's actually gotten really good. I follow a couple people online. I can share those with you through an email, but basically all they do is whenever they find these things online, they just debunk them and they talk about what's actually happening. And with the rise of AI, the not conspiracy theories, but the information being put out there, you can create whatever pictures you want now. They're like, see this picture, this is happening right now. And you go, hokey Dinah, that's crazy. Turns out it's just AI, it's not even real. And so it's getting worse because AI is helping people pass off false information. And so this is why we're going to go through this book, the book of Revelation. We're going to spend some time in it. We're not going to do like just chapter by chapter. That would take a really long time. I encourage you to read. There's some really good books out there. There's some really good commentaries. They're not commentaries, but just books kind of about in general, how you can read like Revelation for everybody. Those are good kind of books just to help you understand. If you're the type of person who's really interested in the book of Revelation, you go, I've never read a lot. I've got a whole bunch of really great books. Feel free to borrow them, or I can at least give you the names of them, because it is an important book to read. It is an important book to read. So this is why we're going through this. And then after this book, we're going to do a really short series on heaven and hell, and kind of we're going to go through those and try and tie up everything all together. So, and here's the biggest reason we want to go through this. For a lot of you, some of you don't know who Lisa Dickey is. For some of you, you do know who Lisa Dickey was. And if you don't know who she was, she's passed away from cancer a number of years ago, was part of this church. And one of the last conversations I had with Lisa was about the book of Revelation. And she was asking me questions, and she went to Heritage. I don't hold it against her. And so right? But as we were talking about Revelation, she said she started asking me about these things, and she started asking about the book because she had lived most of her life in fear of this book. She goes, it's such a scary book. I don't understand it. And so we had a really good conversation. And at the end of it, she's like, man, that was really helpful. And I said, you're welcome. And she's not alone. She was not alone in discovering that book. For most people, be honest, do you ever read this book? If you're doing devotions, if you're just reading through, do you ever read Revelation? Most people don't. Functionally, most people just kind of eliminate the book of Revelation because it's a weird book to read. It's kind of confusing. It can seem a little scary. Almost all the liturgies, if you're a part of a church, either Eastern Orthodox, or Orthodox church, there's really no revelation in the liturgies as they work through the different things. It's just a weird book. And so functionally we kind of removed it. It barely made it into, and here's some of the reasons why, right? It's a weird book. There's lots of scary 10-headed beasts. There's lots of scary, animals with horns and guys who are trying to chase you down on horses. Like if you ever had a nightmare, it'd be a guy in a horse trying to get you, right? And you cannot run a horse. There's kind of weird things. Now it barely made it into the Bible because Lisa and us and everybody else, we're not the only people to struggle with this book, right? It barely made it into Luther and Calvin, both of them. They didn't want the Bible. They didn't like the book of Revelation because they thought actually you don't really find Jesus in here. Jesus is too confusing. He's too hidden. It's too weird of a book. They didn't think it should be in there. Even Nietzsche, right? He said that his words are, it's the greatest outburst. He calls it an outburst of wild vindictiveness. This is what he calls Revelation. Right? It's not in the lectionaries. It's not really in the liturgies. One guy, once you know this guy's name, you'll never forget it because it's Luke Timothy Johnson. He's a commentator. Right? It says, few writings in all of literature have been so obsessively read with such generally disastrous results as the book of Revelation. And this guy writes commentaries on the book of Revelation. Right? Few writings in all literature have been so obsessively read with such generally disastrous results. Right? Because is the book of Revelation, is it good news or is it bad news? Which one is it? Is it about Christ or is it about the Antichrist? Is it about the past? Is it the present? Is it the future? Are you trying to instill fear? Are you trying to instill faith? Is it about judgment or is it about hope? Is it about particular evil empires? Is it all evil empires? These are some of the questions that people struggle with. And so I'll ask you. First, we're going to ask you, because I want you guys to talk this morning, is when I say the book of Revelation, what words, what phrases come to mind? Just yell them out. Any words, phrases that come to mind? End times, apocalypse. Any other words? Tribulation. Controversy. Like if I say book of Revelation, left behind, yep. Any other words? Conclusion. Millennium. I haven't said the two I thought everybody was going to say. Those are the first two that come to mind. Right? Anybody else? Come on, throw a few more out here. Rapture. There's one of them. That one usually comes out first. Fear. Right. Any other words? Phrases? When you hear that word, what do you think of? What kind do you think of? Right? All these words, right? Antichrist pops up a lot, usually. Rapture, fear, end times, millennium reign, dragon. No one said 666. Come on. Someone says Revelation. I go straight to the number of the beast, right? That's usually one of the first. That's like, if no one knows the Bible, they don't know Christianity, they all know 666. That's just like a cultural thing, right? And it's kind of, people go, oh yeah, 666. No idea. But they understand Revelation, end of the time, 666. All sorts of these different things, right? And of those, usually, like I said, usually when you ask people, two of the words are always top five is rapture and antichrist, which is interesting because neither of those words ever appear in the book of Revelation. They don't appear, and they're usually in the top, the earliest answers that people give as the word rapture and the word antichrist, and neither of them are there. But we have these ideas around them. They've just come in that, they're not in here, but these are things that we talk about. And so, and so this is where we're at. I like that, when you said fear. You think the book of Revelation, lots of people just go fear. Anybody confusing? Like, who's ever done a study? I don't mean like at church, like just on your own. You're like, I'm going to study this to understand it. Few people. One person. It was my dad. That was it. Right? Who was a pastor and missionary for years. Right? He had to. We all had to. Right? We had to take it at school. It's not a book that people like to study. And why? I'm going to ask you why. Like I said, I want you guys to talk this morning. Why don't you study it? And if you don't read it, because almost no one put their hand up, by the way, when I asked who reads it, and don't be shy, because you're just like everybody else. But why don't you read it or study it? Why does this book not come up? Why is it not high in your radar? If you have a reason. Yeah, totally. Yep. And maybe you don't have any specific reasons, but maybe you do. I don't know. I just like to hear from your smiling faces, that's all. I don't have a sermon, so you got to keep talking is what I'm trying to say this morning. No, anything? No? I just, because again, this is what comes up a lot as you talk to people in the book of Revelation. They go, oh yeah, they know it, but they've never really read it, and they've certainly never studied it, and it's just kind of confusing, and we just go, yeah, I think I know what it's about. There's some bad stuff happens, and then God wins at the end, and that's kind of it. And so this is why we're going through it. This is one of the reasons we're going through it. This is a book which, some people don't even want in the Bible, and yet kind of the books written about Revelation are endless. They're endless. Like you said in the 70s, some of the most best-selling, what is probably one of the best-selling Christian book series of all time? It's Left Behind. It's all about this. They're terrible books, by the way. We have a whole section in today's sermon on why it's so bad. But multi-million dollars. Everybody read them. I think I was like one of the few people who didn't read them growing up. I meant to. I just never got around to it. I was reading Lord of the Rings, and so it's really long. I didn't have time to get to these ones. No, it's because when I got there was like 9 books, and I don't start really long series. I'm like, no. You had to get me with book 1 or 2. So that's a side note. Squirrels. Anyways, let's right? Here we go. So, right? It's the revelation of St. John, or revelation of John the Apostle. So John is the guy who wrote this, but which John? Which John wrote this? We don't know. But most certainly, almost 100%, it's not the John who wrote the Gospels. The biggest reason why is technically it's very different. They're not, if someone writes you a bunch of letters and all of a sudden that same person sends you letters, but they have very different words and they're structured different and they're written you go, I don't think this is the same guy. That's how it works, right? And so there's very, very little chance, according to the commentators. I'm no expert myself. I just read other people who are way smarter than me, and basically I'll say, yeah, there's basically zero chance this is the same guy. But whoever this guy is, whoever John is, he's definitely a part of the church. He definitely knows the churches. He definitely loves the churches, and they know who he is. And so this is John. Again, we don't know much about him. All we really know is he's not the gospel writer of John. Here you have the picture of the island of Patmos is where he is. Really hard to see, but you have Rome, Italy's up over here, you got Greece, then you got Italy. Well, actually, no, this is Rome. Sorry, I was looking at a different map. That's later. But you can see Troas, you can see Sardis, you can see Smyrna, you can see Philadelphia, Ephesus, Laodicea. Those are the 7 churches that are being written to. So you can kind of see where it is. He's off on an island. He's been put there in exile for being a Christian, for speaking out about Jesus. They got tired of him, and they checked him out there, and this is where he is. There's where he's writing from. And so, not too far away. And kind of, as we'll see in a later map, he's between Rome and Jerusalem. They're kind of in the middle of those 2 places. And so this is where he is. This is who he is. This is where he is. So when is it doing? Anybody know who this is? If I just throw this up there real quick. I thought it was kind of cool. They took the thingies and turned him into a guy. I'm like, that's neat. Fun for AI. Right? It's not Jesus. Someone's like, is that Jesus? It's not. No. So when is it written, right? When do you think it was written? When do most people think it was written? Just throw it out there. Throw out a name associated with the timing. Nero. That's classic, right? Anybody else? Nah, it doesn't matter. Everybody thinks Nero. Most likely, again, according to just about everybody, written after Nero because it's about 99% sure, written after the fall of Jerusalem, written after Rome has destroyed Jerusalem, after 70 AD. And so most likely it's during the reign of Domitian, which is 81 to 96, which is after Nero and before the next guy. And so it's actually not, and everybody thinks it's written during a time of persecution. Nero did persecute them. At this exact moment, there's kind of like some local persecution, but there's not a national, organized, governmental persecution against Christians. But as this is being written, there's a fear of that coming back. What we lived through 20, 25 years ago, there's a fear that it's starting to come back. And so they're not, at this exact time, going through an institutional persecution, but they're starting to get that sense of, they're starting to have that feeling. And so part of this speaks to that, for sure. And so, yeah. And also, they think it was written after that because it was after the fall of Jerusalem that the Jews and then the Christians start to refer to Rome as Babylon. They don't do that beforehand, but after they destroy the temple, as when you start to see in the literature, everybody start to call them Babylon, which, as we read through, every time it says Babylon, it's not Babylon, right? It's Rome. And so, kind of just some of the info coming here. So he's on this island, and it says this, right? This is how it begins. It says, this is the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show his servants what must soon come to pass. He made it known by sending his angel to his servant John. This is how the book. And so John writes this as an angel has come to him. He's going to show him a vision. And then he just writes down this vision, and this is what we have in this book. Now, there's 3 ways that this is written. One, he's just describing word for word exactly what he saw. That's the first option. The second option is that he saw a vision, and then he took what he knew of the Old Testament, what he knew of Scripture, and then he sussed it out to make it explainable to the people, right? The third option is that he's just, because he's writing an apocalyptic book, there was no vision. He's just doing the same thing. He's using his knowledge of the Old Testament to write to the people with the same message. And so most people kind of go with the middle one. It's pretty clearly not a word for word, like this is actually what he saw, due to the style of the book that it is, but also a bunch of the stories he uses in here are stories that people just knew. Like these are just kind of common folk tales, and he's using them to make a point. And so it would be a little odd that the vision he saw happened to incorporate a bunch of local stuff. And so most people kind of go, okay, he saw something, but he's not explaining it word for word because that's not how apocalypse works. Apocalypse, which we'll look in a second, is always about some sort of heavenly messenger bring some sort of divine dream, vision, whatever you want to call it, to give a message and to show you, but it's always done in kind of this very symbolic, allegorical, metaphorical way. And this is what we have here. So whatever he actually saw, he's using, because when you read the book of Revelation, it uses so much Old Testament scripture. He quotes, and it doesn't actually directly quote, but alludes to, right? Over half of this book is Old Testament allusions to the Old Testament. And depending on how you're counting, 300 to about 1,000 different allusions. It's not that long of a book, right? Like 400 rough verses, and well over 240 of them have some sort of, one or multiple mentions hearkening back to the Old Testament. So as John, whoever John is, as he wrote this book, he is just soaked in the Old Testament, especially Ezekiel, Isaiah, Daniel, and the Psalms. Those are the four that he uses the most. Those are the four, and within those certain chapters, but those are the ones he uses the most, and he keeps going back to them over and over and over. Like the story in here, there's a story of the dragon tracing the woman. I encourage you to read the book if you haven't read it, right? You read that story and go, wow, that's a crazy story. Rome had their own stories, Python and Leto, and in that story, right, that story is used in Rome to praise the emperor. It's used as emperor propaganda. And so John uses that same story, a story he knows, everybody knows, and he changes it to be about Jesus. And then, the four horses, the four horsemen of the, right, he steals that from Zechariah. They're not the exact same, but he steals that idea. He's got the colored horses he takes. And so as you read it, it's not a vision. He's using what Israel already knows, what Christians already know. He's using the scriptures to bring it back and to make a point. All these kind of things. And so, is that helpful? Try and make this book helpful. Right? In case someone says, did he see this? He's just writing it down. This seems really weird. Whatever he saw, he's using the Old Testament to make sure that they understand what's exactly going on. So what is apocalyptic? Apocalypse is, the word, what does it mean? It means to reveal or to the unveiling of something. This is what it is. There's a couple things here, right, which are helpful. Right? These things always happen, right? It's a vision, there's a journey, there's angels, some sort of human figure, some sort of judgment, tons of symbolism, which is what this book is all about. And it's always, the big thing is crisis to bring hope. Apocalypse is always written, because this is a popular type of literature before Jesus and after Jesus. There's about a 300-year period, kind of over the time of Jesus, where this is very popular, and then it just kind of dies out. And the AD 70 destruction of the temple was a big moment for people to kind of revive this style of literature. And so this is what it is. It's fairly common for both Jews and Christians. There's all sorts of different, Daniel is, First Enoch, if you've ever read that, Fourth Ezra, the Shepherd of Hermas, I think it's the Epistle of St. Peter. These are all different versions. You can go read them. They read similar to the book of Revelation. This is not the only book that is like this, because you cannot read this book and be like, I'm going to read this like the way I read, Ephesians, or the way I read the Gospels. But it's the only one really, except for a bit of Daniel, that we have. And so you kind of read it in that same sense. But if you go and you read other apocalyptic books, it makes more sense. So I encourage you, if you have the time, and if you care at all, to go and read some of those other books. Again, resistance. It's all about bringing hope, especially to people who are under persecution, people who are under oppression. So this is what it is. Now, it's apocalyptic literature. It's also a prophetic book, but not prophetic in that like we're predicting the future, right? Because the Old Testament prophets, they didn't really predict the future. They were always speaking about their own time. And then later on when Jesus comes, we understand the fulfillment. But they didn't know they were speaking about the future. And same with John. He's not speaking to us. As much as we like to say he's speaking to Canadians, he's not writing this to us. He doesn't have us in his view. Right? He's writing to people who are going through something, and he knows them. He knows these churches. He knows where they are. Geographically, socially, he knows them, and he is writing to them. We always need to remember that. Otherwise, Revelation just becomes a book about, who is this and who is this, and how did he know our culture? He doesn't know our culture. Right? But the amazing thing about the Holy Spirit is as he's writing for his own people, what he's writing about is something that is taken by every generation of believers since then. Because here's the thing, as we're going to find out, it applies to every single generation. It applies to every single society. It's not just for them, even though he's writing to them. It is for all of us. And it's not just especially, because I don't know about you, but my understanding of Revelation and Left Behind is very North American centered, right? Like it's very much USA centered. Turns out there's other countries in the world with Christians too. And this book is also for them. It's also for them. So it's apocalyptic, it's prophetic. It's also a letter, like Paul's letters, where he just writes to the churches. He's writing to these 7 churches, but obviously he's writing to more than the 7 churches. He knows it'll be read by more, but there's 7, by the way, anybody? Any significance to that? 7 shows up in this book all the time. A symbolic number, completeness, fullness. So he could be writing to 20 churches, he could be writing to 13 churches. None of it sounds as good as 7. So he writes to the 7 understanding. So again, prophetic, apocalyptic. It's a letter, kind of like Paul's. It's liturgical. I don't know if you know this, but there's 9 songs throughout the Song of Revelation. There's 9 different songs. There's 8 other kind of spoken doxologies. It's very heavy on the liturgy. It's very heavy on songs. It's very heavy on praise in all these different ways. Because part of what we're going to discover is that the book of Revelation is not this fearful book trying to scare us into heaven. It's a book that helps us learn how to live and how to worship every day. It's a book about helping us worship every day. And so this is just one of a popular worship song where the first 3 lines are straight out of the book of Revelation. Any famous music that you know comes out of Revelation? Come on, Michael W. Smith, what's his famous song? Friends are friends forever. That is famous. Much like Revelation, that song will go on forever and ever. No, Angus Day, right? That's all about Revelation. What about Handel's Messiah? Ever heard of that? Right? 2 of the greatest pieces in that entire overall piece come straight from Revelation, right? It has this huge, there's so many other songs you can go through it. Art, if you're big into the art world, which I'm very cultured, so I know all of the names of the people. I don't want to tell you about them all. But Revelation has such input into the art world too. There's so much beauty. So through music, through poetry, it's a very poetic book, a liturgical book. And lastly, it's very political too. It's a very political. You cannot read this book and not get the sense of politics. It's not fantasy. It's not that. It's not we're talking about weird animals and beasts. It's all about politics. It's a very, very political book because ultimately the whole point of this book is there's only 2 ways you can go in life. One is you can follow the dragon and one is you can follow the Lamb. And this book is a call. It's a call to repentance. It's a call to follow the Lamb. And it's a call in showing what that looks like to follow the Lamb. And then it's a call and a showing of what it looks like in eternity if you choose to follow the Lamb. And ultimately that's the ultimate thing here. So some of the themes you're going to see is the theme of the throne of God. The throne of God comes up. That's just God's reign. That is who God is. Over and over, it comes to the throne of God. God is in charge. Right? God reigns. Jesus is Lord. This is the ultimate message of the Bible, first and foremost. Right? The Bible in 3 words: Jesus is Lord. Right? That's the entire Bible in 3 words. Jesus is Lord. The message of Revelation is very much that. Right? God is reigning. Jesus is Lord. Nobody else. No Caesars, no emperors, but Jesus. It's very much about the evil empire. Right? Very much so. There's only 2 empires in the world. There's the evil empire, which you can follow, or there's the empire of God. There's the kingdom of God. And what does it look like to live? And we're going to begin next week with the 7 churches, right? And look at how the evil empire infiltrates the kingdom of God and what we do about that. So evil empire is a huge part of this. Like I said, it's very much a political book. It's all about the churches and the Christians' temptation, right, to idolatry, into violence, to greed, oppression, injustice, arrogance, idolatry, all the things that make up Babylon, which is Rome, but also every society since. I discovered this, actually. Many writers within America, but writers, commentators around the world, when they have to think of a nation which kind of represents best, the biblical Babylon, what country do you think they came up with? It's America, over and over and over. It's pretty funny to read, actually. Commentators from all over the place, they're like, yeah, America basically nails it. And I was like, good for you guys. That's great. We live next door to them. But good for us. And so there's this, we're going to look at that. We're going to do a whole Sunday on that and what that looks like. What it looks like when we don't actually recognize Babylon in ourselves. And we're going to look at ourselves, but we're also going to take a little sneak peek at our neighbors to the south because they kind of embody exactly what this book is all about and what it's calling us to. So we're just going to bash America. If you're American, you may want to skip that Sunday. Now, we're not going to bash them because it's good for us to learn. We're basically the same country in many ways. And so this book is important not just to people back then, but it's still important to us today as we kind of see how religion and nationalism flows together and creates this thing which we think is good, but turns out is not so good. And so, again, these are some of the themes. And I like this. This is the map I was thinking of. There's Rome, right? There's Jerusalem. Then you see Ephesus there and the little island off of there is Patmos. So he's kind of in the middle of this huge empire between Rome and Jerusalem, torn between these 2 empires, these 2 kingdoms. And this is what the book is about. How do you live this out? And literally the churches he's writing to are in between these 2 places. This is who he's writing to, caught in the middle of this whole thing. Again, this faithful resistance. It's also a book of imagination because if you know what this painting is, this is when Rome destroys. This is they sack AD 70, they sack Jerusalem. This has already happened. And so part of this book, it's very much filled with imagination. If you ever read it, it's very imaginative. It really gets your brain going. Why is that? Because if you're a little country and you're Israel and you've lived under the oppressive empire for so long, this book comes along to say, hey, you know that empire that's crushed you and destroyed your temple and everything you know? Jerusalem, the new Jerusalem, is going to come and destroy it. It's going to come and it's going to destroy it. And you are going to be a part of that. And one day you won't be the oppressed. You're going to be the victors. You're going to be the ones who win this, right? Like imagine you're kind of this nobody little group in this massive thing called Rome. But this book, it helps your imagination. It helps you. This is where we get our hope from. And this helps us live this way. Because if you live under Rome, will always defeat us. And Rome will always win. And the empire never loses. Right? It's hard to live with hope. Am I wrong? Right? If you just feel like I'm always going to be crushed. And so part of what John is writing is to give us this imagination for a life that maybe we're not experiencing right now. But one day it's going to come and it's going to be here. And so how can we bring that into the present? How can we live that? And this is that whole sense of, one day, if you've read the book, there's the lion and there's swords and there's fighting. But ultimately, who rules in the book of Revelation? It's the Lamb who was slain over and over. Right? The lion turns, you think, oh, here comes the lion, and we kind of love that picture. We're going to destroy our enemies. That's not what happens in the book. It's already ruined for you. But the Lamb who was slain shows up. And it's the Lamb who rules, and it's the Lamb who destroys the dragon, which is why we need to choose. Right? And we need this imagination to do this. Because one day this is coming, right? The New Jerusalem. It's coming down. By the way, it'll be roughly this big. I found this. I thought that was interesting. Based on the biblical dimensions. So I want top floor. You get a good view. Yeah, you get a good view. So this is just the basis of it. This is just an introduction to. These are the themes. Right? Faithful witness, resistance, judgment, new creation. All of these things, but ultimately it comes down to the lamb or the dragon, right? And that sounds good. That's basically what it's about. Are you going to choose the lamb or are you going to choose the dragon? What did we grow up with? We grew up with Russia is bad and North Korea and, Anybody grew up when the United Nations, or not United, European Union became 10 nations? You remember that moment? That was huge in the apocalyptic world. This is it. This is the 10 kingdoms. None of that stuff happened. None of that stuff happened. I blame these guys. We're going to skip through this part pretty quick. You ever heard of dispensationalism? Anybody? All right. It's kind of this fun little thing Left Behind series is based upon. It's just a series where the whole of history is broken up into these different dispensations. But then when you get to the final ones there, when you get to the millennium, right, then it's broken up into even smaller parts, and it's like the Christians disappear, and then tribulation comes, and Jesus comes, and Satan's loosened. There's a little more tribulation, but then the final defeat, and then the new creation. It's broken up. It's a bunch of things. It's pretty, premillennial, postmillennial, panmillennial. It'll all work out. Whatever millennial you happen to be, right? Any names associated with this? This is huge, by the way. This is what, if you grew up in the 70s, 80s, this is what you grew up with. I'm not saying you're wrong for believing this. This is what you were taught. And I think after World War II and the Cold War and the Vietnam War, all the different wars that were going on, it kind of seemed like the end of the world was coming. And this stuff was massive. Remember where this stuff came from? Remember any names? Any names you associate with this? See if you know any of these names, right? John Nelson Darby, kind of the first guy. He's the guy that brought it over. C.I. Schofield Bible, that was a huge part of this. Louis Sperry Chafer. Then it got passed on to a guy named Dwight L. Moody, and he kind of became the American guy who brought this. And then Hal Lindsey, late great Planet Earth. He's the one that really popularized it. And then LaHaye and Jenkins of Left Behind fame, they stole Hal Lindsey's stuff and turned it into a best-selling novel. And that, literally people say, people didn't read the book of Revelation, but they read Left Behind series. And so as much as the Left Behind series is not a commentary on the book of Revelation, it absolutely is for most of us who grew up in the 80s and the early 90s, right? This is what we read, and this is how we understood the end of the world. It comes from this dispensational viewpoint. So really quick, because I'm going too long. Why is it dangerous? Because I'm going to say, here it is, Left Behind. Sorry, not Kirk Cameron one. Right? But what do you get from this? What's your first sense when you see this? This is from their poster. First, Anthem. Besides Nick Cage's dead eyes, yeah. I think I got 1% on Rotten Tomato. Right? What do you see? What is your first sense when you see this picture? What fear? Oh, what fear? What emotion? Right? Right? What do you see in the back? Fires, burning, bad, everything bad. This is the Left Behind series. The Left Behind series is based off of 100% fear. It's fear-based, right? It's just a really poor understanding of the book of Revelation, and it leads to fear. That fear also leads us, if you've ever read the books, basically at the end, we'll short this up a little, at the very end, what actually happens, right? You kind of end up with this weird tunnel vision where as Christians, war is good, first of all, especially war in the Middle East is good. Why? It's going to bring about the end times. War in the Middle East is good because it's going to bring about the end times. So if you want the end times to come, you want war in the Middle East, which means when your country goes to war in the Middle East, you support it unequivocally, because this is a good thing. If you read these books, this is kind of how it comes apart, right? It's not good. Right? And it's all about violence. We all kind of need to become these people who are prepping and getting ready for war, start stocking up and learn how to live in the midst of, post-nuclear world. The hard part is when you read those books, it's very much fear-driven. Everybody else is bad. Everybody else becomes our enemy. And when Jesus said, I'm calling you to love your enemy and pray for your enemy, if you read those books and that's your kind of theology, it's pretty tough to go anywhere with your neighbors when they're always the bad guys. They're always the enemy. Where the whole point is trying to escape the world, to withdraw from the world. Just wait for the rapture so I can get out of here, and then everybody else, all those bad people, they get the rapture. I don't have to get it. Let me get out of here. Right? When you also have this kind of theology, it leads to this, well, we can't do anything about problems. Environmental problems, doesn't matter. World's going to burn. Social problems, doesn't matter. Not my problem. This is all just signs of the end times. This is all just signs of the end times. We can't do anything about this war, all this stuff. Don't worry about it. We just got to get out of here. Right? And unfortunately, it leads to suspicion. It leads to kind of violence and love of war. And it ultimately kind of leads to this kind of Jesus. Because if you read the Left Behind series, Jesus he's a warrior type. And Christians, we have to literally kill in the name of Jesus. This is where this theology comes from. This is where it heads to. The only way it can go is this way of, and if you don't believe me, here's a chopping board you can buy for your house, which says God, family, country, and guns. You can buy it on Etsy. Yeah. I didn't look up how much. They're all over the place. I've found like 3 or 4 different people selling these. You just put them in your house. God, great. Family, wonderful. Country, guns, right up there. Right? Who's seen a God and Guns flag t-shirt? All over the place. And those are Christians. They're always Christians. Why? Because we have this theology that says at the end times we need our guns. Why? To take out the bad guys. Why? Because that's what happens at the end. And that's not what happens at the end. That's not what happens at all. We don't have to pick up anything. Not only is it not helpful, it's actually super dangerous. And so, but not for us, because we're going to go through this book. We're going to find out we are not going to buy these. We're not going to hang these in our house. We're not going to celebrate our country or our guns, because that's not who we are. That's not what God's calling us to. That is not where our theology is headed. And if you've actually read the book of Revelation, you understand that is not where it's headed. That is not how it works. We get to put down our guns. We get to put down our flags. And we get to pick up, the book of Revelation. We get to just follow the Lamb. And so we're going to do our best to have no confusion, to have no fear. We're going to have some confidence. We're going to demystify the mystery. We're going to make meaningful the menagerie. I put that together. All these ridiculous kind of crazy things, we're going to figure it all out. Because this is how it begins. Right? This is literally the key to the whole thing. It says, Revelation, read the beginning, 1:8. The book ends the same way. It says, I am the Alpha and the Omega. I am the beginning. I am the end, says the Lord God. I am the one who is, who always was, and who is still to come, the Almighty One. That is, if you want one verse from the entire book, make that the book. Make that the verse. I am he who was, I am right now, and I will be forever. This is ultimately the message of Revelation. As we go into next week, we're going to look at the 7 churches. We're going to dive into those. I just want you to, again, basically throw away whatever you knew. If you read the Left Behind, just throw that out and join with us. And we're going to go down this road. We're going to figure this out together. And hopefully at the end, you will not live in fear of the book. You will not live in confusion of this book. But before we go, I do want to ask, and I'm going to write it down without my pen. I'm going to remember it. As we go through this, is there anything particular that you're like, you know what, I would love to hear about this because this is something that's always bothered me. This is something that's always confused me. This is something. So just yell it out because I want to make sure that we hit on those. Because it's a big book. We're not going to hit on everything. We're going to try and cover the major themes to make you feel good so that when you read it, you're like, man, this is actually a really comforting book. Imagine this. Instead of imagining like dragons and beasts and stuff, imagine a guy, a pastor, at his desk writing a really encouraging letter to churches who are going through some stuff. That's how I want you to imagine this. Right? And it's an encouraging letter that's supposed to bring comfort and supposed to bring hope. This is what the book is. So that's the picture that I like. John sitting at his desk on an island. I like to think it's like a beach, and he's got a drink in his hand. It's really nice. Right? It's nice. It's not terrifying and scary. It's wonderful and it's calming, and he's writing to people to help them find some peace and some hope in a bit of a crisis. So I want you to kind of have that in your head. But is there anything? Yell at anything. Just want to make sure I don't miss anything. If you're like, man, I really want to hear about this, we'll take 2 minutes at the end of every sermon, if it doesn't fit in, just to cover those things. Feel free to email me, call me, or yell it out right now. No? We're covering 666, don't worry. That's a big one. Millennial reign, we got it. All the beasts with the 10 heads, we got those. Just want to make sure I'm not missing anything. Mark of the Beast, yep. Mark and the Beast, right? Who's Mark? All right, the Mark of the Beast. We're going to cover Mark of the Beast. That's the whole 666 bit. We're going to do that stuff. I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything. If you're like, man, this thing has bothered me my whole life, I really want to hear about that, you let me know. That's where we're going. This is literally just an introduction to kind of the themes, who John is, where it's being written from. We didn't really get into who it's being written to because we're going to do that next week as we look at the churches. But overall, the themes, right? The throne of God, the political, the prophetic, the apocalyptic, all the different ways in which we read this book. And they're all come up, the themes of worship, themes of liturgy, themes of faithfulness, themes of being a witness. All of these things come through, and they're all wonderful things. And so I encourage you, I hope that you will continue down this road the next 7 weeks. But I just want to start you off with that kind of an overall view.